Mary always believed grief would be the hardest thing she'd ever survive. She was wrong. My name is Mary. I'm 67 years old, and for the last 12 years, I've lived alone in the little blue house my husband built with his own hands. Not bought. Built. Every wall in that house carried fingerprints from our life together. The kitchen cabinets Harold installed one summer while humming old Frank Sinatra songs under his breath. The tiny scratch on the hallway floor from the time our son Jason dragged his toy fire truck through the house when he was 5. The garden out front where Harold planted white roses for our anniversary the year before cancer took him away from me. People think houses are just wood and paint, but they're not. Not really. Some houses become witnesses. Mine witnessed birthdays, Christmas mornings, arguments whispered behind closed doors, and the quiet kind of love that lasts 40 years without needing to announce itself to the world. After Harold died, the silence inside that home became almost unbearable. At first, I used to leave the television running just to hear another voice. I'd wake up at 6 every morning out of habit and still make 2 cups of coffee before realizing there was nobody sitting across from me anymore. Nobody reaching for the sugar bowl, nobody smiling over the newspaper, nobody saying, "Morning, Mayor." God, I missed hearing that. But eventually, grief softened around the edges. Not because it disappeared, because I learned how to carry it. I built myself a quiet little life, peaceful, predictable. I watered my roses every morning. I folded laundry while old gospel music played softly in the kitchen. I waved to neighbors from the porch, and every Sunday my son Jason came by for dinner. At least, he used to. When Jason was little, he followed his father everywhere. If Harold fixed a sink, Jason wanted a wrench in his tiny hand too. If Harold mowed the lawn, Jason marched behind him like his little shadow, and Harold adored that boy. We both did. We gave him everything we had, not money. We never had much of that, but love, safety, a home. I still remember sitting at the edge of Jason's bed after nightmares when he was 7 years old. He'd wrap those little arms around my neck and whisper, "You'll always protect me, right, Mom?" And I always said yes. I think somewhere deep inside me, I believed he'd protect me one day too. That's what family is supposed to do, isn't it? But life changes people quietly. That's the dangerous part. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just little shifts you barely notice until one day the person standing in front of you feels like someone you used to know. Jason changed after he married Rebecca. At first, I tried very hard to like her. And believe me, I truly did. She was polished, beautiful. The kind of woman who always looked perfectly put together even at 8 in the morning. But there was something cold behind her smile that unsettled me from the beginning. Not rude, exactly. Just calculating. Like she was always measuring things. Measuring people. Measuring opportunities. Measuring what belonged to her. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself because I loved my son more than I loved being right. When they got married, I welcomed her into my home with open arms. I gave them Harold's dining table. I handed Rebecca my mother's china set. I even helped them with the down payment on their apartment when Jason lost his job for a few months. And every time they needed something, I said yes, because mothers do that. At least mothers like me do. But slowly, things began to feel different. Jason stopped lingering after dinner. Phone calls became shorter. Rebecca started making little comments that sounded harmless until you sat alone replaying them later in bed. This house is probably worth a fortune now. You know, maintenance on older homes can be exhausting for seniors. Jason worries about you living alone. I remember the first time she said that last one. I laughed softly and told her, "Honey, I've lived here longer than you've been alive." She smiled, but her eyes didn't. And over time, Jason stopped correcting her. That hurt more than anything, not the comments, the silence. Then came the morning I'll never forget for the rest of my life. It was still dark outside, the kind of cold winter dawn where the sky looks heavy and colorless. I was asleep in my bedroom when pounding shook the front door so hard it rattled the hallway frames. Bang, bang, bang. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again, louder this time. "Mary, open the door!" My heart immediately started racing. I grabbed my robe and hurried down the hallway, confused and half awake. The clock on the microwave read 5:12 a.m. Who comes to someone's house before sunrise? I thought maybe Jason had been in an accident. Maybe something terrible had happened. My hands were trembling as I pulled back the curtain beside the front door. And then I froze. Rebecca was standing on my porch. Behind her were two men beside a truck with locksmith equipment. For a second, my brain genuinely could not process what I was seeing. Rebecca crossed her arms tightly against the cold and shouted through the glass, "Mom, open the door. This is my husband's house." I just stared at her. I couldn't breathe. One of the locksmiths avoided looking directly at me. The other shifted awkwardly beside his toolbox, like even he knew something about this felt wrong. I unlocked the door slowly. My voice barely worked. "Rebecca? What is this?" She stepped forward immediately. "We're changing the locks." I actually laughed for a second, not because it was funny, because sometimes shock sounds like laughter. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Changing the locks on whose house?" She looked me dead in the eye. "Jason's." I felt something inside me drop. Not break, not yet. Just drop. Like missing a step in the dark. I remember gripping the edge of the door because suddenly I didn't trust my legs anymore. "There has to be some misunderstanding," I said quietly. Rebecca sighed like I was making things difficult. "Mary, your son has every legal right to this property now." Legal right? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind immediately started searching for answers. Papers, documents, conversations I might have misunderstood. Months earlier, Jason had asked me to sign some refinancing paperwork because he said it would help protect the house if something ever happened to me. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, my little boy with the fire truck, my Jason. And standing there in my doorway before sunrise, with strangers waiting behind her, I felt the first terrifying crack in something I had believed my entire life, that a mother's love makes her safe from betrayal. But the worst part? I still wasn't angry. Not yet, just confused. Because somewhere inside me, I kept thinking, there's no way my son would do this to me. The strange thing about heartbreak is that the world keeps moving while your own life feels frozen. The morning Rebecca arrived with those locksmiths, something inside me changed. Not suddenly, quietly, like a light flickering out in another room. After she left that day, I sat alone at my kitchen table for nearly an hour without touching my coffee. It had gone completely cold, but I kept holding the mug in both hands anyway because I needed something steady to hold on to. Outside the window, the neighborhood was waking up. Cars backing out of driveways, dogs barking, a school bus stopping at the corner. Normal life. Meanwhile, I felt like my entire world had tilted sideways. I kept replaying Rebecca's words in my head. This is my husband's house. Not your home, not Mary's house, not the place where your husband raised your son. Her husband's house. I thought maybe Jason would call that morning. He didn't. I waited anyway, hour after hour. I jumped every time my phone buzzed, but it was never him. Just spam calls, pharmacy reminders, a coupon from the grocery store I never remembered signing up for. By evening, I finally called him myself. He answered on the fourth ring. His voice sounded distracted. "Hey, Mom." Mom. That word used to feel warm. That night it felt automatic. "Jason," I whispered carefully, "what happened this morning?" Silence. Not long, but long enough. Then came the sigh. That sigh people make when they've already decided you're the difficult one. "Rebecca shouldn't have shown up like that," he muttered. I closed my eyes. Not this never should have happened. Not I'm sorry, just she shouldn't have shown up like that. I thought to myself, so it's true. The problem wasn't the betrayal. It was the timing. "Jason," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice from shaking, "why would she say the house belongs to you?" Another pause. Then legal words started appearing in his sentences. Technical words, cold words. Ownership structure. estate planning, protection, future arrangements. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my son. The little boy who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a butterfly in the backyard. Now he sounded like a stranger reading from paperwork. And in the background, I heard Rebecca's voice. Not loud, just close enough, guiding him, correcting him softly, like he needed permission to speak. That hurt more than I can explain, because mothers know. We know when our children are speaking from their hearts, and when they're hiding behind someone else's courage. "Mom," Jason finally said, "you're overreacting." Overreacting. I looked around the kitchen Harold built with his own hands, the curtains I sewed myself 20 years ago, the family photos lining the refrigerator, the tiny pencil marks near the pantry door where I measured Jason's height growing up. Overreacting. I almost laughed again. But this time, I didn't have the strength. After that call, something changed between us permanently. Not because we stopped talking, because our conversations stopped meaning anything. Jason still called occasionally, but only briefly, only carefully. Like every conversation had invisible rules now, and Rebecca became bolder. She started talking about long-term plans for the property, mentioning renovations, suggesting maybe I'd be more comfortable in a senior apartment someday. Someday. As if they were already waiting for me to disappear. One afternoon, she stood in my kitchen, opening cabinets like she already owned them. "I'm just trying to help," she said with that polished little smile. I watched her fingers touch Harold's coffee mugs, my husband's mugs, and suddenly I felt tired in a way sleep could never fix. You know something nobody tells you about aging? It's not the wrinkles that hurt. It's becoming invisible inside your own family. I started noticing how easily people talked around me instead of to me. Decisions being discussed without my opinion. Conversations lowering when I entered rooms. Jason avoiding eye contact anytime finances came up. One evening they came for dinner, and I spent hours cooking Jason's favorite meal. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, fresh biscuits. The same meal I used to make after his little league games when he was growing up. Back then, he'd run into the kitchen starving, grinning, hugging me before he even sat down. "Best cook in the world," he used to say. That night, he barely touched the food. Rebecca spent most of dinner scrolling on her phone, and halfway through the meal, Jason casually asked, "Have you thought any more about downsizing?" Downsizing. Such a harmless word, until it isn't. I stared at him across the table, at the gray beginning to appear near his temples, at the tiredness in his face, at the man I no longer fully recognized, and all I could think was, I gave you everything. There were years after Harold died when I worked double shifts at the nursing home just to keep this house. Years I skipped buying winter coats so Jason could afford school trips. Years I lied and said I'd already eaten dinner because there wasn't enough money for both of us. He never saw those sacrifices. Children rarely do. That's the nature of motherhood. You bleed quietly so your children can live comfortably. And if you do it well enough, they grow up never realizing how much it cost you. That night after dinner, I stood at the sink washing dishes, while Jason and Rebecca talked softly in the living room. I could hear pieces of the conversation. Market value? Timing. She can't manage alone forever. She. Not Mom, not Mary. Just she. I suddenly felt like a guest in my own life. And for the first time, something dangerous entered my heart. Not hatred, not anger. Distance. Small at first, but growing. Because love begins to die the moment dignity has to beg for permission to exist. A few days later, I found myself standing in front of Harold's photograph in the hallway. I touched the frame gently and whispered, "I don't know what happened to our boy." And in that quiet house, for the first time since losing my husband, I no longer felt safe there either. There's a moment when a woman finally grows tired of explaining her pain to people determined not to understand it. Mine came on a Tuesday afternoon, quietly. Of course it did. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a stack of old bills and paperwork spread around me when I found the document Jason had asked me to sign months earlier. The same document I barely read because I trusted my son more than I trusted my own instincts. I adjusted my glasses and read every line slowly this time, and with every sentence. My stomach tightened. My name was still on the house, but certain ownership rights had been transferred, not fully, not yet, but enough to make me understand why Rebecca stood on my porch that morning acting so confident. I remember staring at the paper while the clock ticked softly above the stove. Tick, tick, tick. And for the first time in months, I stopped crying. Not because I felt better, because something inside me finally became clear. Jason and Rebecca had been planning a future for my home without ever asking whether I still deserved a place inside it. That realization should have destroyed me. Instead, it woke me up. You can only beg for love for so long before your soul becomes exhausted, and mine was tired, so very tired. That same week, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I didn't tell Jason. I didn't announce it dramatically. I simply put on my beige coat, drove across town, and walked into a quiet office building carrying a folder against my chest like it contained the remains of my entire life. Maybe it did. The attorney was a kind older woman named Denise. Gray curls, gentle voice, sharp eyes. She listened carefully while I explained everything, the paperwork, the pressure. The morning Rebecca arrived with Locksmiths. At one point, Denise leaned back in her chair and asked softly, "Mary, did you understand what you were signing at the time?" I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped, because the truth was painful. No, I understood trust. That's what I understood. I trusted my son. And sitting there in that office, I suddenly realized something heartbreaking. Good mothers spend their lives teaching their children how to walk through the world safely. But nobody teaches mothers how to survive when those same children become the people hurting them. Denise helped me protect the house legally. She explained my rights, changed documents, put safeguards in place, and with every signature I wrote that day, I felt a tiny piece of myself returning. Not the younger version of me, not the woman before grief, but someone stronger, someone quieter. Someone finally beginning to understand that kindness without boundaries invites cruelty. When Jason eventually found out, he called me immediately. For once, Rebecca wasn't speaking in the background. It was just him. "Mom," he said sharply, "why would you do this without talking to me first?" I actually closed my eyes when he said that, because after everything, he still didn't understand. I thought to myself, why would I protect myself without asking permission first? The irony almost broke my heart. I needed to make sure I was safe, I told him calmly. Safe. There was silence on the phone. Then came frustration, accusations, defensiveness, excuses. "You're listening to the wrong people." Rebecca was only trying to help. "You're making this bigger than it is." I listened quietly, and somewhere in the middle of his anger, I realized something important. My son had spent so long avoiding discomfort that he'd convinced himself my pain was merely inconvenience. That realization hurt, but strangely, it also set me free. Because once you accept that someone cannot give you the love or respect you deserve, you stop waiting for it. After that conversation, I stopped chasing him. No more long emotional voicemails. No more trying to explain my heartbreak in ways he might finally understand. No more shrinking myself just to keep peace inside a family already falling apart. I began building a life that belonged to me again. I replanted the garden. I joined a small church book club. I started drinking coffee on the porch in the mornings without staring at my phone waiting for Jason to call. And little by little, the house stopped feeling heavy again. One evening near sunset, I stood in the hallway looking at the pencil marks beside the pantry door. Jason at age 6, Jason at 10, Jason at 16. Proof that once upon a time, a little boy loved this house too. I ran my fingers across those faded marks and cried softly. Not because I hated my son. I never could. A mother's heart doesn't work that way. No. I cried because I finally understood something devastating. You can love someone deeply and still need distance from the damage they bring into your life. That was the lesson nobody prepares mothers for. Sometimes strength doesn't look like fighting. Sometimes strength is simply closing the door gently and refusing to let people wound you again. A few weeks later, there was another knock at my front door. Not pounding this time, just quiet, careful. I opened the curtain slowly, and standing there alone was Jason.